Welcome to the England pod, reacting to Thomas Tuchel's first squad announcement. Ali Maxwell and Dave Walker. We're sitting in the middle of Soho Square, which is an address with some historical relevance for the England senior men's national team on what feels like a big day. Dave and I were both at Wembley for Thomas Tuchel's first press conference, and there was a lot to talk about. There was a lot for him to tackle, and therefore a lot for us to chat about on the show today, Dave.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I think, you know, a room full of seasoned journalists, right? And there was us two rocking up for the England pod. And it might be just another day at the office for those guys, but for us, it was interesting to see Thomas Tuchel in person, to sort of feel his energy in the room. And, you know, obviously he spoke well. It's a time-honoured cliche, right? And I don't mean it like that, but I came away quite positive just from seeing how sort of confident and comfortable he was and how prepared he was to take on some of the, not really testy or difficult questions, but there were a few questions about the press reports about him not being in England every weekend and all that. Like, he's happy to get into battle with that stuff. Yeah. And as we've seen in the past with him at Chelsea, like, not afraid of fighting his own corner with the press. And I came away more positive than I went in after I saw the initial squad announcement, I think.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that based on the very initial response to the announcement around 9 o'clock, particularly on social media, but frankly in all of my WhatsApp groups as well, there was a real sense of disappointment and quite an angry response in some cases. And I was trying to work out what it is, apart from just general passion for England, that makes people feel so offended when squads get announced and they don't necessarily go the way that they were expecting or hoping. I think with this one, we've bigged up, Dave, the new era, the sense of anticipation, the 18-month path between us and the World Cup in the USA and hopefully, challenging for that title. And it seems like for many England fans, this squad announcement saw the excitement, anticipation, the new era feeling evaporate quite quickly. And over the course of the day, been trying to sort of, when things calm down, you start to hear what the manager says in response to the questions around the inclusion, for example, of Jordan Henderson, Marcus Rashford and others. Yeah. When someone actually sits there and explains their decisions, it's not that strange for your own strong, angry reaction to be somewhat dampened when someone sits there who's thought about it a lot and goes, this is why we've done what we've done.
Yeah. I don't think I was particularly angry when I saw the squad announced. I was surprised by the inclusion of Jordan Henderson, a man whose name we didn't even mention on the squad profile we did the other day. And I don't think many people would have been surprised at that, us not mentioning him. Nobody thought he was in the picture. I was surprised that Marcus Rashford is straight in there, straight away, after only playing a handful of games, albeit relatively well, for Aston Villa. I was a bit surprised there were 4 goalkeepers. But I wasn't angry, I wasn't fuming, why isn't Morgan Gibbs-White in the squad, why isn't Adam Wharton in the squad? There were a variety of reactions on social media and in replies to some of the tweets we put out. Even George, who, you can hear from if you check our social channels now, like he had a bit of a strong stance on, like, why isn't Gibbs-White in the squad? Why is Henderson in there over Gibbs-White or Wharton? Wharton, as it turns out, is now with the under-21s. Gibbs-White didn't get in. It was interesting to hear Tuchel's thought process and hear him explain his decision-making. And as we can hear, he was very big on Jordan Henderson's leadership qualities.
And what I think is really interesting about what he says about Henderson is that he doesn't mention anything footballing, really. He mentions the fact he's been playing for Ajax, captaining Ajax. He's been playing in European competition, albeit he was suspended for this week's game. But almost none of the reasoning for selecting Henderson comes back to anything technical, anything to do with a tactical fit, or anything seemingly that he's expecting him to do on the pitch. It's all about intangible qualities of leadership and of passing on knowledge to younger players, and I suppose specifically in Henderson's case to Curtis Jones, broadly operating in the same area of the pitch, playing for Liverpool where Henderson has such a strong history. And what I find fascinating about this discussion, Dave, is that I think it's a massive shame that Adam Wharton is not in the squad and that Jordan Henderson is, because I think that Adam Wharton in deep midfield positions is the sort of player that could unlock a lot of what England could be able to do on the ball and make the attacking part of the team in particular better, right? And there was a moment where I felt perhaps Wharton's being held back, his minutes being managed because he's recently come back from groin surgery, and I was willing to excuse his omission from the squad. And then he gets named in the under-21 squad, and that sort of evaporates, and that argument, if you like, or that excuse for him not being in the seniors can't exist. If he's fit to play for the under-21s, he's fit to play for the senior team. I think from a footballing point of view, it's a massive shame, but the discussion around leadership, around what it takes to build a squad of 23 players, not a team of 11, a squad of 23 players to succeed in knockout football environments, in high-pressure situations. It is a truth of sport at all levels that having some experience, having some players who know what to expect, who can educate those who are maybe finding things a bit tough and a bit new and a bit scary or a bit difficult or a bit uncertain, is a good thing to have, right?
Yeah.
There are books and books on leadership, on team spirit, and a lot of it comes back to making sure you have, whatever you want to call them, guys that set the culture, guys that run the dressing room. There's a number of different footballing phrases for people like this, and Tuchel has identified Henderson as that for him, for this England squad. And almost regardless of what you think about the player in question, because you can bring Dan Burn into the conversation as well, as someone that Tuchel highlighted for having positive dressing room qualities. But it makes the discussion...
You watched the clip of him dancing in the dressing room.
It does just... I think it's an interesting discussion around the England squad in general, where how much appetite do we as fans have, or understanding of the importance of this, do we have for having 2 or 3 players who we don't think are as good currently at football, but who might have an impact on the team that we can't really see from the outside?
Yeah, I don't think we do have a big understanding of it. It's obviously one of the areas we can analyse football matches tactically as fans. We can watch matches, go to matches, feel it, whatever. But we obviously don't know what goes on in dressing rooms, in training sessions at St George's Park and stuff. And coaches continually talk about players like Harry Kane has always spoken in these terms as well, but players who set the standard and what they bring to the group. And I do remember actually when we had those games in the lockdown period and around that time, COVID time, when there was no fans, Jordan Henderson was one of the players most notable for how all of a sudden everyone could hear everyone talking on the pitch, and Henderson just never stopped talking, just barking out instructions, encouragement to his teammates, talking to the referee all the time. It will be interesting to see how many minutes he gets, how much he gets on the pitch in these 2 games. They're not friendlies. It's not like we're necessarily going to have wholesale changes. You know, they're competitive matches. So there's every chance that a fair amount of players in this squad don't get on the pitch across these 2 games, depending on game state and all that. But it was interesting as well. He was asked off the bat, I think, actually, about Henderson and Rashford and whether Thomas Tuchel was thinking about now or the World Cup, and are they in contention for the World Cup? Is Jordan Henderson in contention for the World Cup? And he was pretty firm that yes, he is. Anyone in this squad has a chance of going to the World Cup, and on more than one occasion as well. He you know, you referred to it a minute ago quite rightly as like 18 months or just under 18 months of the World Cup, which obviously is true in terms of the time left. But in terms of the days of contact that Tuchel has with his squad and with his players in person, he kept referring to it as, we've got 60 days till the World Cup, which was like, oh Christ, 2 months to the World Cup. But if you look at it that way and you condense it all down, he doesn't have many days, actual physical days, training days, match days with this group of players. So attentions are very much focused on that end goal of the World Cup already. And whilst it seems fanciful in a way to think that Jordan Henderson would play a part for England at the 2026 World Cup, you reflect back on the Euros in the summer, some of the reports in those early sort of periods in the tournament when things weren't going well, some of the whispers which started to come out from the squad and people were reporting on it was that some of the players in the squad felt they were lacking a little bit in the senior leadership areas like that they had benefited from in previous tournaments, Henderson being one of those players that wasn't there.
It's an interesting one because a broad complaint that we've seen on our social channels is that it's a boring squad. It includes too many names from a previous era that we thought was now behind us, and this idea that there's not been enough turnover, that there aren't enough exciting new names in there. We touched on it on the last episode. There's actually been a big churn over the last 2 or 3 years between the World Cup in 22 and the Euros in 24. Half of the squad turned over. I think there's only so much churn you can do on that front. And there's the fact that there are some new names. Everyone's very pleased that Miles Lewis-Skelly is in the squad, and I expect that we will see him maybe from the start on Friday night. That would be exciting. If not, no doubt he'll get some minutes in the left-back role. Tuchel spoke glowingly about his ability to handle the pressure at Arsenal and how he's got no qualms whatsoever about his character, his personality on and off the pitch as an England player. Morgan Rogers is still a very new England player. He's not going to be a debutant, but I think we still have to consider these guys as fresh players. You can't always have 4 or 5 new names or debutants in any squad, particularly when we've had so many over the last few years. So I'm interested in this idea. I saw someone say it's like being back in 2016 again. It's really just Henderson and Rashford, I think, are the names that are being brought up there. And Rashford is a completely different case. Yeah. I don't see the Rashford inclusion and the Henderson inclusion as something that could be taken together. Yeah. The Henderson inclusion is specifically around his leadership and his experience. The Rashford inclusion is nothing to do with that. In fact, there's almost a slightly condescending way that Thomas Tuchel talked about the call-up of Rashford, where he referred to Rashford's maybe dipping into some poor habits previously and standard slipping, and how impressed he's been at Villa over the last month or two, of what he perceives to be electric play off the bench, ability to impact a game off the bench in particular, both with the ball, with his pace, running in behind, and he references off-ball work as well. And his call-up is basically a message to Rashford to keep working hard and maintain these standards. Yeah. There's a part of me that wonders, is that almost special treatment for a player? That why should Rashford be able to be called up in order to motivate him, when most players would say, hold on, I am motivated to be called up to England. It's not the call-up itself that should motivate me. I think that's an interesting thing to think about, but I do want to just make sure. My point is that you should separate the Rashford and the Henderson inclusions, and just because they are names from before that have been out the squad and now that are back in, it doesn't mean you're turning back the clock.
Rashford's had plenty of good moments for England, even as recently as the 2022 World Cup against the Pigeons.
Some bloke has such disdain for the squad announcement and for our content that he just threw a full ham sandwich at the feet of a flock of pigeons.
If you get shat on by a pigeon, that's supposed to be good luck, right?
Good luck.
So if we get one on during this pod, I'm taking that as we're going to win the
World Cup. Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, look, Rashford's got a good history with England, really. Obviously, his recent struggles meant that he didn't get in the squad for the Euros, and he wasn't seemingly really in the conversation. But even at the 2022 World Cup, he scored goals for England. He came on in games, even if he wasn't starting, and he was always an option for Southgate. And I remember being at friendly at Ellen Road before the 2018 World Cup, and he scored an absolutely brilliant goal back then from outside the box. I think that one was against Costa Rica. And I don't think we should just write him off. If he's playing well for Villa and he can continue on that level and get back to his best, which he's showing signs of potentially being able to do, in a really good team for Villa in the Champions League quarterfinals, great, let's get him in.
As a bench option.
Yeah.
Give Gordon an hour and Rashford on for the last half an hour. But what he has in his favour as well is the sort of player that he is, the sort of wide forward that he is. We have, on the right-hand side, generally, we have players that like to operate inside, whether it's Saka, injured at the moment, Foden, or Cole Palmer. We expect them to play as left-footers coming inside. We expect Kane to drop deep. We've spoken about this on pods. The left side of England's attack needs to have someone, really, who just makes a lot of runs in behind with speed, and Rashford is clearly that sort of player. So I kind of feel like if as a footballer he was more of a technical type, I don't think he would be in the squad based on his current performance level. But it's about having the sorts of players in the squad that can make the team better. And in Gordon and in Rashford, I think on the left side, compared to a Gibbs-White, for example, who's been omitted, it's just the sort of player that you want in that team, I think, with the others that we have. Dan Burn, if he features in these two games, he'll be England's oldest debutant since a 33-year-old Kevin Davies. in October of 2010,
Nice.
stat by Opta. He was basically bigged up as just an incredible bloke, which I love. Like, I love the idea that you get your first call up for England, and Tuchel didn't make much reference to his technical ability, his defensive ability. He mentioned that he's really tall.
Yeah.
And he mentioned he was surprised he's never been capped before, which is a nice thing to say. And he mentioned great guy to have in the dressing room. And I was reflecting on it afterwards and thinking, there's always a defender in a major tournament squad that ideally doesn't play a minute. Lewis Dunk was in the Euro squad.
Yeah.
Connor Cody was in the World Cup squad. These guys, in a dream world, don't play a minute.
Yeah.
You need them for depth in case of injuries, but you don't want to change your back line much. So actually, again, it's a bit like with Henderson. There's a bit of a discussion around, like, with those guys that are unlikely to play and not going to be starters and aren't obvious, like, game changers off the bench, do you just want 3 or 4 good blokes to have rather than the 19, 20, 21-year-olds and give them some experience of the camp?
I think you might be doing a slight disservice there, although I know the point you're making, but ultimately he is still playing for Newcastle, who are having a good season. He's had a good few years since he went to Newcastle. Obviously his career journey has been a long and winding one to get to this point. And it's great that a player like him can take the pathway that he's taken and end up in the England team at his age. Like,
he's played in the Conference. He's played in League 2. He's played in League 1. He's played in the Championship, Premier League, and now in England International, we hope. We love that.
Champions League as well.
If there's one thing we love, it's the English football pyramid.
Yeah, exactly. Bit more sober than the last time you talked about that in a public square, aren't you? But yeah, I think it's great. But I think there's every chance, in the short term at least, that he will have a role to play on the pitch. He's obviously been playing centre back for Newcastle this season, but he has played at left back and spent a lot of time playing at left back over the last few years for various teams. Thomas Tuchel referenced the fact that he actually name-checked Lewis Hall as the only player that didn't make the squad apart from Ben White. Was Lewis Hall, and it shows that Lewis Hall's clearly in his thinking as prominent left-footed left back. But you'd expect Lewis Skelly to play and get. I reckon he'll get decent minutes across the 2 games, but I think there's a chance that Byrne could potentially do a job for a bit at left back, or if he plays a back 3 again. He was asked, "Are you going explicitly? Do you want to play a back 3 or a back 4?" And he said, "I'm not going to tell you here, but." Basically, I've selected a squad that's got enough flexibility in it to do both.
Yeah.
So Byrne could potentially play in a back 3. He can play a centre back in a back 4. He can play at left back. If he finds himself out on the left hand side, if he's playing centre back but in the game state, finds himself out in that full back position, he's experienced there, he's comfortable there. So I think it makes some sense for him to be in there.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think in terms of a few players who I believe can feel a little hard done by, I mean, I've mentioned Wharton already. I am fully on board with all and any clamour for Adam Wharton to be in the England team. It's both with head and heart.
Let me ask you though, if he didn't go to the Euros, obviously he went to the Euros but didn't get on the pitch, and he was a surprise inclusion in that squad in the summer. No one saw that coming. That was one of the big things we were talking about when that initial training squad was announced, that Wharton was in there.
Yeah.
If that hadn't happened and he was still just a member of the under-21s, would you be banging the drum for him to be in this squad in the same way?
I think definitely part of the conversation, again, coming back to the way that he operates on the ball in deep midfield areas that Declan Rice doesn't do so well. Now, Curtis Jones is exceptional under pressure in possession, loves those deep areas. Is he a progressive passer on the level of Wharton? No. Is Rice? No. Is Henderson? Not really. So just for me, it's about, we have so many good final third players. And I think one of the reasons why we have looked stale over the years, even with all these star names in attack, is because the ball takes too long to get to them, because we go round the side slowly with the players that we have at the base midfield who aren't good enough or have the vision and execution to punch it through the lines, and Wharton does do that. So I think I would be wanting to have him in the squad just because of the player that he is, regardless of buzz or hype or whatever. But I definitely take the point that you're making. I'm a bit I would have been all right with him just having a rest. Groin surgery at a young age, not ideal. I don't really see the need for him to play for the 21s at the moment, but that's fine. I'm excited to watch him play for this incredible under-21 squad that got announced today. Other players to feel hard done by. I actually think the biggest shock for me, the the change that I would make right now, if Tommy Tactics said, Ali, fine, you've got one.
Okay.
You've got one wish.
Yeah.
I cannot understand, even though I love Ebere Eze, him being in the England squad over Morgan Gibbs-White right now. Partly because often players are pitted against each other in the media that don't actually play the same position on the pitch for England. Like, saying that Gallagher should go instead of Henderson, I think is slightly missing the point, because I don't want Gallagher in those deep midfield areas. So to me, he's not a challenger for Henderson. I make that point to say Eze and Gibbs-White are operating in basically the same position, would be playing either as a 10 or on the left of an attack coming inside. And for me, God, Eze's a great player. God, I love him so much and his whole story. But for me, pretty clear that Gibbs-White is currently and all season much more impactful on the ball, much more intensity with and without the ball, much better out of possession impact on the game. And he's, taken on such a leadership role for a team that's thriving, whereas Eze is much more of a quieter character, not so much of a leader. I'm shocked that he's gone for Eze over Gibbs-White.
Yeah, it's interesting. Would you have Morgan Rogers in that conundrum as well, a little bit? Is he
Yeah,
competing for that spot?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, and I would have Rogers over Eze, again, just based on the last 6 months' body of work, probably 6 to 12 months' body of work. But yeah, I'm seeing, in the same way that we talk about having left-footers who like coming off the right side, this is the group of players that are looking at that inside left channel part of the attack, not your Gordons and your Rashfords who we want to, be speedy and direct and hold width, but players who can impact the game more in the middle of the pitch with their ability.
He did mention players who didn't make... He did mention some players who, not by name, but he was talking about them generally as players who didn't make the squad. And he said that there are players who were good enough, who have done enough to be included in the group, but who just aren't here because, look, I can only pick as many as I can pick.
He said to the BBC's John Murray, not long before we started recording, that there were 5 players that he spoke to and said, you are almost there, but not in. And it's quite interesting because they are Jared Branthwaite, completely understandably.
He's in the 21s.
Is in the 21s, would have been looking at a spot in this squad, and I think it would have been hard to argue based on his performances for Everton this season, but he's not in the squad. One was Morgan Gibbs-White, for obvious reasons. There were 2 names that I haven't seen anyone clamouring for today anyway. James Maddison and Jacob Ramsey, who again are both players in this left attacking midfield spot, left wing spot.
Okay.
So, having not thought that was a particularly strong area of the pitch for England, we're now looking at a position of basically like a depth chart of 6 players, all fighting for basically 2 spots. It's quite an interesting one.
That is interesting, and he talked on a number of occasions about the phone calls that he'd had with players in and out of this squad. I mean, one person actually asked him, what did you actually say to Jordan Henderson? And he kind of responded with sort of, a bit of a dry line about, he just said, hi, Thomas, or whatever. But I would love to see those conversations.
Yeah.
How do they go? How long is he talking to them for? Is it 2 minutes, just a quick, go, just sort of introduce yourself, you're doing okay?
I think more.
You see it in the NFL sometimes, when the prospects get drafted and they have to speak to the GM and the coach on the phone. And it's
yes, sir, I'm ready to go, sir.
30 seconds, Or is it 10 minutes each? And if he's got 50 odd to ring, that soon starts becoming quite a long day for Thomas. But he also said it was a FaceTime as well, not a phone call, because he wants to see the reaction of the players when they get they get the news. And those players that he had to give the bad news to, I bet there was some few forced sort of smiles there. And then when the phone goes down,
well, a penny for the thoughts of Conor Gallagher, who made a move to Atletico Madrid, which has gone really well. It's not a given that English players don't always travel well. Simeone-style football is kind of perfect in a sense for Gallagher's strengths, and is clearly being appreciated over there. He's a player that I never really have any qualms with being included in the England squad, because in terms of a midfield profile, particularly in terms of his pressing and his tackling ability and just general energy, I think it's a good profile to have in the squad. He's been omitted. The central midfield depth is quite light compared to other areas of the pitch. I think there's 9 defenders in the squad, but not that many central midfield players, if we're not counting Jude Bellingham as that. So I feel a little hard done by for Conor Gallagher.
A name that we haven't mentioned, I don't know, nobody's really talking about today, but a surprise inclusion, I think, was Jarell Quansah.
Yes.
He's not played much football at all this season for Liverpool. He's played some minutes recently at right back, covering it, like coming off the bench and like covering in and stuff. And he started the first game of the season against Ipswich, was taken off at half time in that game, and then didn't get back in the team for a long time. And then since then has had like the odd appearance here and there and in cup matches and stuff. But if you're Jared Branthwaite, for example, you must be thinking, well, I've played since I came back from my injury in, I think it was September. I've played basically every game, almost all 90 minutes for Everton. And Quansah finds himself back in the squad after he was in it in the summer before the tournament.
One thing I wanted to mention, because again I think it's the sort of thing that gets a little bit lost on days like today, partly because it's really hard for everyone to be on top of all the injuries that players do or don't have, and it's not, sometimes it's obscured. The news is obscured and we don't know who's fit and who isn't fit to be called up. But I think what's interesting to talk about with this squad and with some of the names that we're talking about being controversially included is that there are at least 5 players that I am sure would have been called up had they been fit. And they are John Stones, they are Trent Alexander-Arnold, they are Lewis Hall, they are Bukayo Saka, and Ollie Watkins. So that is, what's my maths, 5 of 20. That is a quarter of the outfield players in the squad. At least 3 of them would be starters. And that
means you're putting one of the goalkeepers as an outfield player this time.
No, there you go. More than a good maths. I just think it's really worth remembering that. It's like, if they're all fit, a quarter of the names that we're talking about here wouldn't be in the squad. The ones that have just missed out might be even further away from the squad. We need to be reminded that we've got loads of good players in almost every area of the pitch. They can't all get in the squad, and it's kind of worth pointing that out. I mean, Ben White was brought up. He is up for inclusion. He is available. He wants to play. Tuchel is up for picking him, I think. But he said, off the back of his knee surgery, we'll just let him rest a little bit. The door is definitely still open for Ben White as well, who I didn't mention there. And Maguire's injured at the moment. Who knows if he'd have been in this squad? If he'd been included, instead of like Quansah, for example, the 2016 vibes would have been much stronger, and it'd be interesting to see how people would have reacted to that.
2018 than 2016, I would say, for Harry.
Another thing that's worth remembering that I wanted to go through is that only 11 of these 23 players start, and those are the most important players, and 5 off the bench, right? So 16 of these players will be involved in any given match day if Tuchel uses all of his squads. So if you just boil the 23 down, here's a starting 11 for Friday night.
What's your system?
4-2-3-1.
Yeah.
Pickford in goal, but could be any of them. The goalkeepers have been called up as a foursome, and as far as I can tell, Dave, they have got some sort of goalkeeping Hunger Games coming up over the next 2 weeks. If I could watch training, well, actually we are going to be at open training on Tuesday, but if I could only watch one part of training, it would be the goalkeeper training, because that is going to be an incredible level of intensity.
Look, we should say on the goalkeepers briefly, we did have some people get in touch, Palace fans among them, after the episode the other day, saying, I think you overlooked Dean Henderson a little quickly in your discussion there, and fair enough.
I definitely did do that, and I'd like to apologise.
For Crystal Palace, who are having a decent season. But yeah, interesting to see the fact that there are 4 keepers, and it kind of feels like, like you say, he's just going to say, right lads, you just impressed me.
Yeah.
But he did say in the video that the FA put out before the presser, he referenced the goalkeeping situation. He did say, those are the goalkeepers we think are the best. They're the ones we're looking at. And,
I went from my initial reaction to seeing 4 goalkeepers on an England squad announcement of pure disgust.
Yeah.
And I genuinely remember that thought flashing through my head, which is, what a waste of time. Yeah. And then within about 2 minutes, I'd completely flipped and was like, you know what? It's the first camp of the new era. We've got these 4. I think we all broadly would be interested to know who's going to be number 1 and who's the best one to pick. Yes, you normally have 3, but why not have them all there? And why not put them through a rigorous level of testing to work out, the next squad will probably have 3 in it.
Yeah.
And then we'll know. I'm pretty excited about that.
Sorry, Aaron. We gave you your chance.
Yes, see you later. Pickford, could be anyone. James, Quansah, Gahey, Byrne, Colwill or Lewis Skelly at left back.
Pick one, come on.
Okay, I'll go with Lewis Skelly.
Yeah.
But I think with Reece James flying up the right-hand side, Tuchel might go for a...
To give him his name?
I think Colwill might tuck in on the left.
Okay, interesting. Again, in that video that the FA put out, Tuchel was talking about Reece James, and he kept referring to him as Reece. There's a nice bit of familiarity there from their days at Chelsea.
I think Tuchel
surely that was the conversation. Surely Reece James had a chat with Tuchel at the drinks at the gathering recently from that Chelsea
Thursday night pints
squad.
They've got, don't they?
Yeah.
To Reece and Tommy Tactics. Look,
okay, so that's your back. So your back four again. Sorry, is Reece James?
Yeah, Konsa, Gahey, Colwell. What I love is that Konsa and Gahey, not sexy names at all, could be a really solid central defensive pairing for us. We that could be, if they stay fit and if they combine well, if they are a good partnership on the pitch, that could be to use a horrible FPL term, set and forget, right?
Yeah.
Because Stones, we'll see how he comes back, but okay. I would be fine with Konsa and Gahey, even if neither of them play for a so-called Big Six team. Rice and Jones in midfield, with Jones mainly doing the deep operating and Rice marauding.
Yep.
And then Palmer off the right, or Foden. One of them, though, not both.
Yeah.
Bellingham, Gordon,
yeah,
with Rashford off the bench, and Kane up front.
Yeah.
It's a pretty solid team, and it's not that different to the Euros team.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree. I just got the impression, just from hearing Tuchel talk about him, that he's really high on Lewis Skelly, and that we will see him start at least one of these two matches. He talked about. Somebody asked him actually about, do you think he would be able to handle the pressure as an 18-year-old, such a young player? And he said, of course, he's playing in the Champions League for Arsenal. No, it's not a problem. It's the same. It's the same level. It's the same level of pressure. He said he was really impressed when he spoke to him on the phone. So I got a feeling that he'll be in there.
Can I just ask how you feel about this? So you mentioned he brought up playing for Arsenal in the Champions League, handling pressure. One of the knocks on the squad, and a suggestion about Tuchel now, is that he maybe prioritises, in some eyes, too much Champions League level performances, playing for elite teams.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, okay, but he has only managed elite teams for the last decade at the business end of the Champions League. It's not a great surprise that he sees that as the pinnacle, and he believes that players who have proven themselves playing at that level is the most transferable to an international major tournament. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think that's presumably where he comes from. But he referenced it with Henderson. He referenced it with quite a few players, basically the level at which they're playing, rather than their individual performance and skills.
Well, Henderson obviously not playing the Champions League at the moment, but has won it. I don't think that's surprising. It was noticeable. He used he did keep referencing Champions League as a benchmark. So maybe look in a few 6 months' time, Morgan Gibbs-White will be in the Champions League.
Well,
so it'll be all right.
Yeah, for sure. Two more things to finish. One, style of play. You know that this has been, one of the things that I'm most interested in, excited about, frankly a bit worried about. Tuchel gave us some quite interesting scraps here. He didn't say whether he was going to play 4-2-3-1 or a 3-4-2-1 type shape. He did unsubtly reference the fact that he had selected some defenders that he sees as being able to play as outside centre-backs in a 3, maybe right-backs in a 4, centre-backs in a 4, so that he has that option. Makes it seem like he might experiment on that front. But maybe more interesting to me was quite specific words used to describe a style of play that he wants. Some managers are reticent to basically make a rod for their own back by using words like direct and quick and intense.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't look like that on Friday night, it comes straight back at you. Hold on. This was meant to be really intense. This was meant to be dynamic. This was meant to be counter-pressing, but we didn't do that. That's a dangerous game for him to play, but I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, he did say that we're going to play a direct attacking style, that he wants his England team to reflect the Premier League and not try and copy anyone else, which...
Does that mean? Does that mean play like Bournemouth, or does that mean play like Arsenal?
Yeah, exactly.
Or does that mean play like Man City?
It felt slightly. You kind of knew what he was getting at.
Yeah.
But to me, that slightly felt like he was being a bit conscious of the fact that he is a German managing England, and that he was emphasising the fact that he wants England to still be like an English team and represent England in the way that the fans want them to, and all that. Because if you think about it, you drill down into it in a footballing sense, it's a slightly reductive comment, and it's not like individual nations really have clearly defined styles of play in the way that maybe they would used to
some
historically.
Of them do.
Yeah, some of them, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Premier League teams are playing. There are heavy possession teams in the Premier League. There are counter-pressing teams. There are some direct teams. So to sort of say I want it to reflect the Premier League is an interesting comment. We'll see how that actually transpires on the pitch.
He also used the phrase "crash course." He was like, I'm going to get them in. I'm going to tell them what sort of style we're going to play. We might have 2 training sessions and some video.
Yeah,
a crash course, because he was fairly clear that he doesn't see this as something where he has a lot of time to experiment. He needs to establish a form of playing and ideally a core of the team relatively quickly, which I'm feeling a bit nervous about. But that's the situation that we're in with this manager having been appointed with this time frame. We've got to lean into it.
Maybe Thomas was listening to Talk Sport just after 9 o'clock when the squad was announced, as I was. And
not the England pod.
No, well, maybe
he'd already listened to that.
He listened to that on his way in. Yeah. And Harry Redknapp was at Cheltenham with Alan Brazil and Ray Parlour, and they were reacting to the news of the squad. And Ray Parlour asked Harry Redknapp, sort of just suggested to Harry Redknapp, "Oh, Harry, it doesn't take much coaching, really, does it?" And Harry, of course, said to Ray, "No, of course it doesn't, Ray. You pick your best players, you put them in the right positions, and you tell them to play with a bit of confidence."
Yeah.
There you go.
It is so easy, isn't it?
Maybe that's all there is to it.
It is so easy. It's kind of crazy. And last but not least, I suppose, to be self-indulgent for a second, it was really amazing for us, having just properly launched the England pod, to be there at Wembley.
Yeah, it was great.
In a press conference for an England manager. We've both watched thousands of these.
You need to put your hand up a bit stronger next time.
I didn't get a question
didn't quite get it up there, did you?
I was sort of doing the old, am I scratching my face? Am I rubbing my nose? Or am I asking, I've got a question?
You were like a bidder at an auction, just sort of just rubbing your nose. It didn't quite get the job done.
I wanted to ask him. About tactics, and I think he'd have enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But we'll hold that back for another time. He's got some, to ease towards football cliches territory. Your day job, if you like, and something I know that most listeners will be a big fan of. He, like Southgate did, has some interesting phrases that he will be using as part of these press conferences that we're going to have to get used to.
Yeah.
Southgate, we talked about him using the phrase a long squad rather than a big squad, which we didn't like. We talked about him always using the word camp rather than break, which I've now adopted, which I kind of hate for myself. With Tuchel, he used the word concurrence, and I haven't yet worked out exactly what he means by that. That will be a German footballing phrase that he's translating as he goes, and his English is impeccable. But I need to work out what concurrence means.
There was a lovely moment when, I think it was Henry Winter asked him a question about how are you going to deal with playing an aggressive style in the heat of America, North America, next summer. And Tuchel said, in the great way that sort of Europeans sometimes often do, they use a phrase that we were familiar with in English, but they just change it slightly. And he said, can we cross that bridge when we get to the river?
So nice. It's
Which
so
I prefer,
nice.
actually.
It is so nice.
I prefer that. That's good.
Oh, my God, yeah. Really, really nice. He also talks about people playing in the wide positions, the central positions, and the half positions.
Yeah.
And I think, actually, if we're particularly talking about the squad and the composition of it, I might need to start adopting half positions, even though it might be a bit of a wanky phrase, because I'm trying to specify Gordon and Rashford wide attackers, and then I want these guys in the pocket. That's kind of half positions. So we might start using that. We might not. England against Albania and Latvia next Friday, and the Monday after that. We should be back with you midway through next week. And if you have any questions for that episode, please, wherever you can send them to us, whether it's on our Instagram channel, England_pod, on Twitter, England_pod, or commenting on the YouTube video, commenting on the Spotify link. Any questions that you have, we will tackle some of those early next week. We are, as you can tell, really excited about the England pod, quite excited about parts of the England squad, less excited about other parts, but pretty keen just to get going now.
Yeah.
How will the team look against Albania next Friday night? Let's cross that bridge when we get to the river.